Bill Gates faced backlash at the mall, but his reaction stuns the shoppers. The automatic doors of Whole Foods slid open with a soft whoosh, ushering in a gentle breeze that carried the scent of fresh produce and ground coffee. Bill Gates stepped inside. He wasn't in a rush. He never was. His life had been defined by precision, numbers, projections, innovations that altered the course of history. But here, in the quiet hum of a grocery store, time moved differently. It wasn't dictated by billion-dollar decisions or global summits. Here, time stretched in simple, familiar ways. For a moment, he almost felt invisible. Dressed in a plain sweater and slacks, he strolled past a row of apples, running a hand absent-mindedly along the cool, waxy surface of a Granny Smith. His cart held nothing extravagant, just a handful of basics. Oat milk, granola, fresh vegetables, a carton of eggs nestled safely in one corner. He wasn't here for a spectacle. He was here to shop. And yet, attention followed him anyway. Not in an obvious way, not yet. But here and there, lingering glances, hushed murmurs. A customer near the deli section did a quick double-take. A store clerk stacking avocados whispered something to her coworker. Bill had long since learned to ignore it. At the dairy aisle, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He retrieved it with a practiced ease, glancing at the name flashing across the screen. Nathan from the office was calling. With one hand still on the cart, he answered, "Hey, Nathan." A crisp, professional voice filled his ear. "Bill, sorry to bother you. Quick update, you know the proposal we sent over? They want a revision on the funding breakdown." Bill nodded absently, stepping aside to let another customer grab a carton of yogurt. "How drastic?" "Not much, just a reshuffle of categories, but they want it by the end of the day." Bill exhaled lightly. "All right, send me the details. I'll take a look after I..." He stopped mid-sentence, scanning the shelves. "After I finish running an errand." A pause. Then a chuckle from the other end. "You're at Whole Foods, aren't you?" Bill smirked. "Do I really have to confirm that?" Nathan laughed. "Nope. Just picturing the world's most influential philanthropist deciding between organic and non-organic bananas." Decisions, Bill mused. "All right, I'll let you get back to it. I'll send over the documents." "Appreciate it." Bill ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. Then he made his way toward checkout. The checkout lines were moving steadily. He found an open lane where a young cashier, Sophie, as her name tag provided, stood, scanning items with casual efficiency. She was probably in her early 20s, fresh-faced, with earbuds dangling around her neck, likely listening to a podcast in between customers. Bill rolled his cart forward, placing a divider between his groceries and the next person's. Sophie barely glanced up as she started scanning. "Good morning." "Morning," Bill replied. For a while, it was just another normal transaction. Sophie moved with routine precision. Beep, bag, repeat. Then she reached for a carton of oat milk, scanned it twice. She frowned, realizing her mistake. "Oh, hold on," she murmured, adjusting the register. "I rang this up twice." She shot Bill an apologetic look. "Sorry about that. Let me fix it." Bill's response was instant. Kind, measured. "No worries. Happens to the best of us." Sophie laughed lightly. "You'd be surprised. Some people get really worked up over this stuff." Bill smiled. "I doubt one extra oat milk would ruin my day." The moment passed. Simple. The two of them shared a knowing smile. But then, something changed that seemed to ruin that perfect moment. A voice. From the line behind him. Loud, sharp, laced with something unspoken. "Wow, Bill Gates, huh? Buying regular food like the rest of us? Thought you'd be too busy controlling the world." A split-second pause. Then, the entire store seemed to shift. The beeping of registers faded. Conversations quieted. The casual, everyday rhythm of Whole Foods was suddenly replaced by something else, a tension that spread like a ripple. Sophie froze mid-scan. Other shoppers turned their heads. Phones were subtly pulled out. All eyes were now on Bill. And he knew it, as he could feel it. Sophie's fingers lingered over the register keys, her heart skipping a beat. Bill Gates. She hadn't realized it at first. To her, he'd been just another customer, a polite older man buying groceries. The kind you made small talk with about the weather or the price of organic produce. But now? Now, the name felt too big for this moment, too big for this place. Her eyes flickered toward him, really looking this time. The face she'd only ever seen in documentaries, news articles, and the occasional meme was right in front of her, Except now, he wasn't some distant billionaire on a screen. He was a man standing at her register, waiting for his receipt. And someone had just challenged him. Sophie felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The customer behind him, the one who made the remark, wasn't joking. She recognized that tone. It wasn't light-hearted banter. It was sharp, cutting, wrapped in layers of cynicism. Sophie's gaze darted between them, uncertain, because now the entire line was paying attention. And so was she. The tension at the register thickened as others turned their heads, drawn in by the exchange. A woman in an impeccably tailored suit, her designer handbag resting in the crook of her arm, raised an eyebrow. She had the air of someone who didn't have time for nonsense. But this was worth pausing for. A few places back, an older man in his 60s adjusted his glasses, his wrinkled hands tightening around the handle of his shopping basket. His gaze settled on Bill, not with hostility, but with something more careful, curiosity, maybe even concern. Closer to the front, a frazzled young mother jostled a toddler on her hip, trying in vain to calm the child's growing cries. The little girl squirmed and fussed, but her mother's attention wasn't on her anymore. It was on the scene unfolding before her. And then the voice came again, sharper this time, louder. "So, what? You're just a regular guy now, doing your own grocery shopping? Thought you'd have someone to do that for you." A scoff. "Guess buying up farmland doesn't keep you busy enough, huh?" Sophie swallowed hard. The expensive suited woman exhaled through her nose, crossing her arms, clearly unimpressed with the man's tone. The older man in his 60s frowned slightly, shifting his weight as if he wanted to step in but wasn't sure if he should. The young mother, still bouncing her child, muttered under her breath, "Of all places." But she didn't look away either. And Bill? Bill still hadn't turned around. His posture was relaxed, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the counter. Sophie glanced at him, wondering, was he ignoring it, pretending not to hear, or was he waiting? The murmurs in the line grew. A second voice chimed in, hesitant but firm. "Yeah, actually, what's with that, Bill? I saw an article saying you own, like, a crazy amount of farmland." Another voice, somewhere deeper in the line. "And what about the vaccines? You made billions off that, didn't you?" Bill's fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the counter. He had spent decades being scrutinized, questioned, and at times, outright villainized. It wasn't new, but something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was because he was standing here, among everyday people, stripped of the corporate setting, the interviews, the security, just another man at the grocery store. Or maybe it was because he knew perception could outweigh reality. He could respond now, address the man directly, call out the misinformation. But would it even matter? People weren't looking for the truth, they were looking for a spectacle. His pocket buzzed. A call. He exhaled quietly, pulling out his phone and glancing at the screen. Nathan. Again. Bill swiped to answer. "Nathan." Nathan's voice was crisp, efficient. "Hey, Bill, I wanted to check in on the—" "Oh, look at that," the rude voice cut through once more, dripping with sarcasm. "Billionaires have business to attend to." Bill's fingers tightened around the phone. Nathan, on the other end, paused. What was that?" Before Bill could answer, the man behind him, emboldened now, let out a sharp laugh. "Guess we're all just distractions in the great Bill Gates agenda, huh?" Nathan heard that one. "Bill?" His tone shifted. "What's going on?" Bill's jaw flexed slightly. The murmurs in the line grew louder. A couple of people exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable. The older man sighed through his nose but didn't speak. The woman in the suit tapped her nails against her arm. The mother shifted her child, whispering something to calm her. And Bill? For the first time, he turned. But before Bill could open his mouth, a tired but firm voice cut through the growing tension. "Would you let the poor man be?" It was the woman with the child. She hoisted her restless toddler higher on her hip, brushing damp strands of hair away from her face. The little girl, red-cheeked and teary-eyed, squirmed, threatening another meltdown. "I need to get this little one home before she makes this everyone's problem. And guess what? That's a much bigger crisis in my world than whatever nonsense you're trying to start here." The man scoffed. "Oh, I'm sorry. Am I interrupting your grocery run? We're talking about a guy who—" "No, you're ranting at a guy buying groceries," the woman cut in, adjusting her child again. "There's a difference." A flicker of agreement passed through the line. The older man, previously silent, grunted in approval. The woman in the expensive suit, who had been studying her phone the whole time, finally looked up. Her gaze flickered to Bill, then to the man. Bill still hadn't spoken, but he was watching, reading the room, and something had shifted. The man wasn't winning the crowd anymore. Even Sophie, the cashier, seemed to square her shoulders a little. Bill finally lowered his phone. Nathan's voice, still hanging in the air, barely registered. The rude man turned, narrowing his gaze at the woman with the child. "Oh, I see how it is. You're too busy dealing with your little mess to care about the real issues." The mother bristled, adjusting her daughter on her hip. "My little mess is a child who's been up since 5 a.m. If you want to talk about real issues, how about common decency?" Before the man could fire back, another voice cut in, sharp, clipped, and unimpressed. "All right, enough." It was the woman in the expensive suit. She had been silent for most of this, flipping through emails on her phone, pretending to be above it all. But now? She exhaled sharply and tucked her phone away, stepping forward. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said to the man, her tone as dry as it was firm. "Whatever point you think you're making, you lost it 5 minutes ago." The man's face reddened. He let out a huff, looking around the line for support. Nothing. Even the older man, who had watched everything with arms crossed, simply raised an eyebrow and shook his head. The rude man clenched his jaw. "You people don't get it," he spat. "You just eat up whatever these billionaires tell you." "And you think yelling at a guy in a grocery store changes the world?" the woman in the suit shot back. "Please, save the speech for someone who cares." The line fell into an uncomfortable silence. The weight of 100 unsaid things lingered. Sophie leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Mr. Gates, I can call security. They'll have him out of here in a second." Bill tilted his head slightly, as if considering it. His fingers tapped lightly on the counter, a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The rude man noticed the exchange and let out a mocking laugh. "Oh, what's this? Gonna have me dragged out like a criminal? Figures." Sophie's eyes flashed. "Sir, you're disturbing customers. It's store policy." "Oh, so now you care about policies," the man interrupted, voice rising. "Where was all this energy when the world was shutting down, huh? When people were losing their businesses? Losing everything?" The tension in the store shifted. A few customers looked down, uneasy. The older man in his 60s rubbed his chin, thoughtful. The mother with her child bounced her toddler on her hip, hesitant now. Even the woman in the suit crossed her arms, watching Bill closely. Sophie looked at Bill, waiting for his signal. Sophie knew a man like Bill wouldn't want too much attention. He wasn't the type to cause a scene. But this was spiraling. She stole a quick glance around the store. More people had gathered than she realized. A small group had formed near the checkout lanes, some watching with wary curiosity, others raising their phones, recording. The rude man was still going on, his voice growing louder, feeding off the energy of the moment. "And you all just stand here, listening to this guy like he's some kind of saint?" he scoffed, addressing the customers around him. "Wake up," he shouted. "He's got you fooled. All of you." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Not everyone disagreed with him. Sophie's pulse quickened. She turned back to Bill. His expression was unreadable, but she could see it in his posture, the way he stood, still and composed, but completely aware of how quickly this was escalating. He wasn't going to stop it. And neither was the man. So Sophie did the only thing she could think of. She reached under the counter, pressed the small call button for store security, and gave a quick, discreet nod to the nearest guard. The man didn't notice, but Bill did. For the first time, he looked at Sophie, really looked at her, and in his eyes there wasn't frustration, there was understanding. Sophie's stomach knotted. Had she made the right call? Sophie barely had time to process Bill's look before she saw them, two security guards weaving through the crowd, their uniforms stiff, their expressions unreadable. The man still hadn't noticed. "You're all brainwashed," he sneered, shaking his head. "He's the problem, and you just stand there letting him walk among us like he's—" A firm hand landed on his shoulder. The man froze mid-sentence. The weight of authority was suddenly on him. "Sir," the taller guard spoke first, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice and step aside." The rude man blinked, his bravado flickering. He wasn't expecting this. The second guard, a broad-shouldered man with a no-nonsense stare, stepped forward. His eyes briefly flickered toward Bill. And then Sophie saw it, the moment of recognition. His expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift. He knew who Bill was, And suddenly, he knew the situation had just become more complicated. The first guard, however, wasn't there yet. He focused back on the loud man. "If you continue disrupting customers, we'll have to escort you out of the store." The man scoffed, pulling away from the grip on his shoulder. "Oh, come on! You're kicking me out for what? Having an opinion?" He turned, scanning the growing crowd. "Is this the world we live in? No free speech? Just security goons protecting billionaires?" More people were watching now. Bill hadn't said a word. His silence was fueling the tension. The woman in the suit crossed her arms, exhaling sharply. "Maybe if you weren't acting like a lunatic, no one would have to kick you out." The older man in the queue, who had been silent until now, gave a quiet nod. "You've made your point, son. Now let the man buy his groceries." But the rude man wasn't backing down. He turned to Bill, jabbing a finger toward him. "Say something, or are you too much of a coward?" And then, Bill Gates finally cleared his throat, and all eyes turned to him. For the first time since this started, he spoke. "You know," he said, his voice calm, "I think you're right." The rude man blinked. Everyone else? They froze. The words hung in the air. "I think you're right." For a moment, the entire store felt like it had been put on pause. The rude man's mouth parted slightly, caught between triumph and confusion. This wasn't the fight he'd prepared for. The woman in the suit furrowed her brows. The older man, who had tried to de-escalate, slowly lifted his head. Even the mother with the crying child stilled, her exhausted expression shifting into something more curious. "And Sophie?" She gripped the edge of the counter. What was Bill doing? Bill Gates didn't rush. He let the silence settle, let the weight of his words sink in before he continued. "You're right," he repeated, nodding slightly. "I do have influence, more than most people." He gestured vaguely around them, as if acknowledging the wealth, the privilege, the very things people always accused him of. "And you're right that people should ask questions. We should be skeptical. We should challenge powerful people and hold them accountable." He paused, his eyes holding steady on the man in front of him. There was no anger in them, no sarcasm, just something that made people listen. "But," Bill continued, his voice still calm, measured, "the problem isn't that you're asking questions. It's that you're only interested in answers that fit what you already believe." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sophie saw the rude man's jaw tighten. He hadn't expected a conversation. He wanted a fight. But Bill wasn't fighting. He was standing there, in the same casual clothes, in the middle of a grocery store, simply talking. "You see," Bill went on, "I don't expect everyone to agree with me. I actually prefer it when they don't. It's how progress happens." He motioned toward Sophie, toward the other customers still watching. "But if we've lost the ability to listen, to consider that maybe, just maybe, we don't have all the answers, then we've already lost something much bigger than a debate in a grocery store." Silence. Even the security guards, who had been poised to act, stood still. Sophie swallowed. This wasn't just about this moment anymore. It was about the way people talked to each other, or didn't. It was about how quickly disagreements turned into battles, how no one was willing to take a step back and consider the possibility that they could be wrong. And for the first time, the rude man didn't have anything to say. He shifted